So, introduction. Artificial intelligence has transformed various industries, and its application in real estate is no exception. AI uses complex algorithms and all that stuff to automate processes, enhance decision making, and provide deeper insights into market trends. According to a 2025 research report from NAR, over 60% of real estate firms have started integrating AI to streamline their operations, and this growing adoption underscores the pivotal role AI plays in modernizing the industry. Now, this introduction slide is generic information. Peel back the curtain. We created this slideshow in April of 2025. So this whole thing was produced in 2025 in April last year. We used Microsoft Copilot to do that. Basically, we said, Microsoft Copilot, generate a 20-slide PowerPoint about the dangers and benefits of using AI in real estate. And the AI then created a list of 20 bullet-pointed things to cover in those various slides. We asked it to provide substantial information on each of those individual slide sets of bullet points, which it then fleshed out, and that's what this presentation has. All of the stuff that's not on one of these kind of blue background faded out slides was created by AI. Every bit. All of it. We're going to use that as the avenue for teaching about artificial intelligence, the usage of it, the risks of it, the benefits of it. But just be aware all of the actual textual information of this presentation and all the images, those were all made by a machine. We had Microsoft Copilot was the one that created the structure and the scaffolding of this. ChatGPT, as well as Gemini, provided some of the background information as well. Most of the pictures and the images were created using Gemini, and a couple of them were done with ChatGPT as well. That's essentially the core of this unconventional approach. Is all of this is done using artificial intelligence. With the right usage, you can do quite a bit. But with that said, we're going to talk about areas where that does raise concerns, disconcertion, all sorts of things. My general goal of this training is not to teach people how to use AI in real estate, rather to highlight how AI operates, what it does well, what it does poorly, and where you do need to add some additional guardrails and consideration if you're going to use it in your own practice. The broad swath of what it can be used for makes it very difficult to create a one-size-fits-all training on artificial intelligence. And so we're going to be talking more about kind of the philosophy and the concept behind. So if we go back to this introduction slide, all this was made by Copilot. This little thing here, this 2025 report by NAR, doesn't exist. We haven't been able to find it. We could not find that thing. It was what we would call a hallucination, where the machine, the artificial intelligence, creates something that sounds really accurate and really specific, but it doesn't actually come from anywhere. It's an amalgam of many, many sources, and maybe it's accurate, maybe it's not, maybe you don't have access to the sourcing, maybe it just made it up on its own and you don't necessarily know. To the best of our knowledge, this thing is non-existent. It's maybe as close as you can get was a 2021 report by NAR on technology on CRM usage. It was from a CNBC article that basically quoted some person as saying that was the case, and it was not 60% that was used in the NAR article. It's also possible it was just some other celebrity broker saying, I use artificial intelligence in 60% of my stuff, or it could just be a general statement drawn from Reddit or elsewhere. We don't really know where that number came from, but it's a very specific number, and it's a very specific date. So it just kind of popped out of nowhere. It is more likely than not that there was some kernel of truth somewhere in there, but it was not something we were ever able to find. Benefits of AI, the overview. AI offers numerous advantages in real estate, ranging from operational efficiencies to improving client interactions. Real estate businesses that adopt AI tools often report higher client satisfaction and increased sales efficiency. McKinsey Institute's study on AI in real estate highlights that companies integrating AI see a 20% boost in lead conversions, and those benefits make AI an attractive investment for firms looking to stay ahead. Now, again, to the best of our knowledge, this is not a McKinsey study that is published widely available online. It's possible entirely that there is a McKinsey study that says this thing, and somehow Copilot or Gemini or ChatGPT had a special access to that information that we simply don't have. But if you search for a McKinsey Institute study on AI and real estate, nothing will pop up that provides anything close to this number or anything similar to it. From what we can tell, that 20% boost in lead conversion comes from a Realtor.com study on chatbot usage, basically saying if you take your website and put a chatbot into it, well, let me tell you, clients are much more engaged. That's about what it says, is client engagement is improved. It doesn't say lead conversion occurs, money earned, money in your pocket from using this AI. It instead was drawn from elsewhere. And so you do get a certain degree of kind of a fuzzy connection when you ask artificial intelligence to provide an answer on a very specific topic or a very specific concept. If you ever see, when you ask a machine LLM, large language model, for information about, for example, like a very specific topic, and it spits out a very specific topic in response, you gotta check the source of that, because oftentimes it's not necessarily an original source, or it's a paraphrasing of a paraphrased statement, and it's not necessarily accurate. This thing on the right-hand side is what happens if you ask Google Gemini to make a graphic based on exactly the inputs of this slide. So if you took the language from this slide and said, make me a graphic, this is what it gives you, this like cyber South Korea 20% on a billboard in a building thing. The ability for artificial intelligence to create imagery is very interesting, but it also poses some very concerning questions. We don't really hit upon it in this presentation, but for example, if you have listing pictures, you are able to theoretically use a artificial intelligence like photo editing device to add fires to the fireplaces, to make the sunlight look shinier, all kinds of things. But that does begin to pose questions about whether or not you have a truthful or a non-misleading advertisement. So I would generally encourage you, if you're doing listing pictures, don't put it in a machine to like take the car out in the neighbor's yard to make it look nicer. That does start posing like some serious questions about violation of advertising rules. So while it is cool, it's not necessarily a good move, because you could get yourself in trouble. Enhanced market analysis. With its capacity to analyze large data sets, AI provides detailed insights into market trends, neighborhood evaluations, and property price fluctuations. For example, AI can predict whether a neighborhood's value will rise or fall based on factors like infrastructure development or demographic shifts. And if that sends up little alarm bells in your head, it should. As economist Richard Florida notes, AI's predictive algorithm enables real estate firms to make more informed, data-driven decisions than ever before. That first one, Urban Institute, is a left-leaning think tank. You can see all kinds of stuff they've produced and thought about critically. They produced an article where they used AI as well as Zillow and IBM's various data that they publicly present, and they mashed the two together to try and predict the likelihood of gentrification in a neighborhood. The accuracy aside, the usage of demographic information by artificial intelligence raises some really substantial fair housing concerns and ethical concerns. If I have a client that says, I want to find a house that is as cheap as possible in an improving neighborhood, and AI says, here's a neighborhood where minority populations are moving out, you're going to want to go for that neighborhood, that is a fair housing, it's functionally steering. That is, for lack of a better description, it is the steering or the tail end of a blockbusting structure in fair housing land. That is still a fair housing violation, even if you use the machine to get that information. It's more about the impact of the decision that is made. So if I do start directing my client towards properties that are that AI has told me are improving neighborhoods, and it's largely because of demographic changes, I might find myself on the tail end of a fair housing violation because of it. Now, no one has litigated a fair housing violation because of AI usage, but I imagine we're only about a decade away from that sort of a question actually arising in a court of law. So if you do have questions for a client that asks you to look for something very specific, to do analysis for a very specific topic, I want to find improving neighborhoods where I get best value, something like that. If you ask an LLM, a large language model, chatbot, ChatGPT, whatever, DeepSeek, if you use one of those and you just put in the exact question your client has asked, you may want to ask for some follow-up questions to say, okay, when you say this is an improving neighborhood, what makes it improving? What are the justifications? Well, there's a building going in down the road that's going to have community services available for it, and also there's a shopping complex within a couple of miles away that is expanding or improving, and all those things. It'll give you answers. Make sure the answer is not the demographics are changing. Demographic change is a dog whistle for essentially you've got a potential fair housing violation on your hands. And AI is a black box more often than not. When you ask it a question, you will get an answer, and unless you very, very carefully, critically analyze the way you got that answer, the reliance upon whatever it produces is treated as essentially your decision in the legal sense. So avoid making decisions based off of abstract understandings of what you've asked a large language model or a chatbot or a generative AI. And we did ask it about this Richard Florida thing. It could not produce the quote. In fact, the follow-up on this was I said, okay, can you provide a source for this quote by Richard Florida? And it said, who's Richard Florida? So the machine will give you answers, and if you ask it to critically analyze its own answer that was just given, there are many times where the large language model doesn't do a great job in keeping like a follow-up chain of information. And in this context, it just said, I don't know what quote you're talking about. If you look for it in general, that quote doesn't exist. AI's predictive algorithms enable real estate firms to make more informed and data-driven decisions than ever before. That quote has never been made under the sun. It's not on the internet as far as we can tell. And so when you ask Copilot, hey, where did this answer that you just gave me, where did that come from? And it goes, what are you talking about? That's a made up thing. That should raise some level of concern. Now, we also asked Gemini to create a picture of Richard Florida giving a presentation. It gave us that thing on the left. That's Richard Florida from his bio, and on the right-hand side, that's what he actually looks like. So it's a totally different dude. Even very specific questions asked of artificial intelligence models will not necessarily give you accurate outcomes. The question is going to decide much of the outcome, but in the end, it's trying to please you and give you an answer that it thinks you're going to be okay with. And if you're asking for very specific things and you're able to cross-check those, you'll be surprised how often the response is not as accurate as you wanted it to be. It's great for a springboard. It's not great for creating a finalized product. Lead generation and management. Kathy asks, realtors are not supposed to predict depreciations, so this would be a proper inquiry for, not be a proper inquiry for client. You are able to predict what areas are doing, like what seem like they're improving or not improving, that sort of thing. If the reasoning why your belief is that an area is improving or not improving is based on the demographic movements of that region, that's where it becomes a fair housing question. If it's like there are Hispanic populations moving into this neighborhood, that's why I'm predicting that the value will go down. If that's what you are providing your client, that's a fair housing violation. It's predicting value change based upon a protected class, and that's where you can get yourself into trouble. If it's something separate, like the city's a nice place and it's improving and they just put in a corridor towards the freeway and that's going to bring in a lot of industry, then that's totally okay. But when it's related to protected classes, it becomes a problem. And when you're asking a machine to give you an answer and you don't know what it necessarily uses to provide the output, you may be relying upon fair housing violation information without knowing it, and that's ultimately the risk. AI streamlines customer acquisition and relationship management. Tools like chatbots can instantaneously respond to inquiries, while machine learning algorithms identify potential leads based on search patterns and engagement. HubSpot data suggests AI-assisted lead management can increase conversion rates by up to 50%, reducing the time an agent spends chasing unqualified leads. So if you ask about that HubSpot thing, Copilot couldn't give me the source to the quotation it just gave me. It put it in full-on quotations. It is supposed to be directly taken from somewhere. It was not. As far as we could tell, this comes from a different place. It's a velocitymedia.com blog post. Anyone can have a blog. When I was in undergraduate, I had a blog. Everyone can write blog posts. That's what we found, Velocity Media's blog post, that alleged that AI drove up conversion rates by 40% and cited HubSpot research as the source, not a specific location, just HubSpot research somewhere. HubSpot itself didn't have an article that we were able to use to pull up that information. In the end, it's this structure. You have to go to a different place, a separate blog, which is lzcmarketing.com. It is a HubSpot cheerleading website. Their whole thing is talking about how HubSpot works. And they cited that there was a tech startup that had a 50% increase in conversion rates using HubSpot's lead scoring tech. We don't know what industry that tech startup was in. We don't know how applicable it is to real estate, but this is ultimately some of the problem. Is generally, if you want to think about artificial intelligence and what it does, it is something that uses predictive algorithm to trawl the internet for all answers, or trawl its database that has been provided for all answers that are pretty accurate to what you're going for, what you were asking about. If it finds a website that says there has been a 50% improvement in conversion rates, and it goes, I'm looking for conversion rates, it may treat that as a valuable source. The amount of back-checking and extra research done by a large language model or by artificial intelligence when you use one of these chatbots is not necessarily going to be a uniform amount of research or back checking. It sometimes will just take the words you used and say, that's close enough, and provide an answer that seems accurate, but when you actually start looking under the covers, you'll find many, many different things. Property valuation accuracy. AI enhances property valuation by considering various factors such as market trends, location, amenities, and previous sales data. Zillow's Z estimate, I will never say Zestimate intentionally, it is a Z estimate. An AI-driven valuation model is a prominent example that showcases how algorithms improve accuracy. However, it is worth noting that human expertise should complement these predictions to ensure a comprehensive valuation. Now, the Z estimate is a tool that Zillow produced in 2006. It has been the source of many lawsuits. I believe they've been sued more than 10 times over the Z-estimate itself. The tool specifically tells you it's just an estimate, it is not an appraisal, but most of the court filings on these cases against Zillow imply that the consumer is using the Z-estimate as an appraisal substitute. They are saying my Z-estimate says my house is worth $400,000, so that's what it is. The problem you're going to run into here is the consumer is looking for the easiest way to get their house sold, and oftentimes something like an appraisal, while it is not necessarily fun, it is a very distinct part of the process that creates what amounts to a legally reliable answer. Z-estimates are not considered that legally reliable in any way. In fact, if you do consider the Z-estimate as a replacement for an appraisal, you can get sued over that, as Zillow has learned many times over. So just be aware, you're going to have a consumer that may come up to you and say, hey, I already know how much my house is worth, it's X. And they might not be accurate or correct in that. They may have just taken the shortest and fastest path to getting at that statement or that number. Your job is going to be essentially explaining to a client how their number might be inaccurate, or how there might be other accuracies that are needed to pull. You need a professional to come up with, or you may just have something that comes down to the bank will only accept an actual appraisal. Unfortunately, the Z-estimate is not it. Now you are seeing a fair number more lenders that are doing appraisal waivers or skipping over waivers because they have their own internal processes that'll essentially do the same thing as the estimate does, and they're assuming that the value is enough. That is going to probably become more sophisticated as time goes on, but at present, just make sure your client knows the Z-estimate is not an appraisal and it will not stand as an appraisal substitute, so you may have to value the property in a way that's different from what it looks like on the most publicly facing website. Streamlined processes. From automating tedious paperwork to managing appointments, AI simplifies operations, reducing administrative workloads for agents. For instance, DocuSign, powered by AI, allows for seamless digital transactions and contract management, enabling agents to focus more on client relationships and less on administrative tasks. Now, there is some truth to this. Artificial intelligence streamlines administrative, tedious tasks very effectively if it's used properly. But where you do want to start asking questions, for example, this was a Copilot request. I asked Copilot, give me a slide, streamline processes. I want you to tell me about improving tedious paperwork management processes. And it said, here's an example. For instance, DocuSign, powered by AI, does all this stuff that makes it easier. Copilot is a Microsoft product. Microsoft does not own DocuSign. The two companies, however, do have an expanded global strategic partnership that they've had since 2022. Now, I don't want to assume that there's some kind of a grand conspiracy going on, but when you ask Copilot, give me an example of artificial intelligence automating tedious paperwork tasks, and the first thing it grabs upon is something that has a connection to artificial intelligence, connecting, or rather to Microsoft's own strategic partnership. That ultimately it should raise some questions. The question essentially should come down to, am I getting absolutely unbiased information from this machine that I am utilizing? I would argue that the Copilot being willing to provide me only an example of a strategic partner of Microsoft is something that should raise some red flags, because it seems like maybe Copilot does not provide unbiased information, but instead there's a finger on the scale that provides more Microsoft favoring product recommendations. And that's something you just need to be aware of. When you're using these products, they are products. They are tools that are designed for profit margin at some point. I'm sure ChatGPT will eventually make a profit. That's something that they are trying to aim for, and as a result, you need to be aware you might be getting sold to rather than just getting an unbiased response. Now, it is worth noting, AI can reduce the pressure of repetitive administrative tasks. It is a concerning thing for a lot of businesses that there are a number of tasks that seem to take up a huge amount of the day that are not the lucrative part of the day. Artificial intelligence can streamline and speed those tasks up substantially. That's great. However, you always want to make sure that you have someone who is aware of what exactly the task is that they're doing, a human being, for example, at the other end of the process that is ensuring that things were done correctly. You essentially want to use AI as an assistant, not as a replacement. It should be something that automates the tasks but does not replace, for example, the review process at the end of it. There is going to come a point where the technology improves to the stage where you can just let it do stuff automatically and assume accuracy, but we are not at that point yet. It is still something that can potentially go wrong. Personalized customer experience. AI tailors property suggestions based on a client's preferences, search behavior, and budget. For instance, platforms like Realtor.com utilize AI to provide personalized recommendations. According to a Forbes report, personalized AI systems increase user satisfaction by 35%, enhancing the overall client journey. Now, this Realtor.com thing is an interesting connection. Realtor.com is using AI to assist the purchase by doing same look and feel on the properties. If you've looked at Realtor.com in the last couple of years, they have each one of the properties that's available. You can look at something. It's like, oh, you want to see a house that also has a chandelier over on the left-hand side by the window, and it'll give you other houses that have a similar look and feel within the area or within the region or within the price range. It'll give you various ways of finding similar properties. That's very interesting. It's cool and it is helpful to clients. However, the website uses OpenAI's contrastive language image pre-training models. That basically means it is pre-trained on a bunch of images and it looks for things that are similar. There may be many houses that have similar dining rooms with a chandelier in it that just don't have a good picture of that chandelier dining room, and that will never show up on the same look and feel model. So it is entirely something that is based upon what has been uploaded and what can be found. Artificial intelligence is not omniscient at this stage. It is simply using pattern recognition of what is existing on other websites, on other digital platforms. And so if you have a client that's looking for something similar to a house, it may still require that you do the kind of ground level research on some of these properties to find the house that has the same look and feel, because the technology is not necessarily perfectly accurate. Now, that's not to say don't use these same look and feel things. Your client should never use that. It does provide you with a list of all the things that have the same look and feel, but just be aware it will only go as far as the photographs are able to prove. Now, what that does imply is if you are going to have property that is on Realtor.com, for example, or it's on Realtor.com through an IDX feed of some sort, the more photographs you can get of the kind of complex angles of the property, the more likely it will be able to draw out or then compare that with other properties by basically doing image recognition. It'll say, like, I see a chandelier and a window next to it. That implies this is one of those rooms that has this look and feel. The more pictures there are in those listings, generally, the more accurate it will be when it gets filtered through by one of these artificial intelligence training models, like the image recognition models. Oops. I went one too far. This Forbes report, it's an actual quote from an article called "Work as We Know It Ends in 2025, How AI Will Rewrite the Rules." It was written by a guy named Steve Osler. Copilot gave me his quote directly. That's interesting. The actual numbers are uncertain, but it's likely from Osler's own business when he says it enhances client satisfaction by 35%. That's his company that he's most likely citing there. He's a CEO of a company called Wildix that provides unified communications solutions. And based on their website, if you go to the Wildix website, they have bet most of the farm on AI being the way of the future. They connect you and most of the website back to a different web page called XB's, your sticky sales communications channel, and it's a Wildix affiliated AI company, which is not to say that this is not a real quote, but rather Copilot gave me a quote that was just a statement of a Forbes report said it improves client satisfaction. When you dig a little further, you find out that it came from an AI evangelist who has bet substantial sums on the future being artificial intelligence. That doesn't mean the future isn't necessarily an AI place. It just means I'm listening to someone who is already, they have to have the future be an AI place for them to be lucrative in the future and successful. So I'm not necessarily getting unbiased information. It may come out that way on the response that Copilot gives you. However, you need to do a little more digging to find out where the actual sourcing goes. The last piece is I asked Gemini to create an image of AI tailoring a property for a client, and I got this. The little Monopoly Man cat in the bottom corner makes, I don't know where that came from, but that was what Gemini gave me. So you'll get some weird images sometimes. Automating data entry and analysis will minimize the risk of human error in financial calculations, property evaluations, and market forecasts. This accuracy boosts the client trust and ensures smoother business operations. Now, there is a study that happened in 2024, November of 2024. It was an edition of Computers in Human Behavior. It's called Trust and Reliance on AI. AI increases trust. The findings were that AI increases trust to a point. But if you over-rely on artificial intelligence, if everything is created by the machine and there's no human input whatsoever, that decreases trust substantially. If you think about like a listing description that just starts to sound like an AI description is probably not going to be received with as much trust as a description that seems very apparent that you've wandered the property and can tell people the interesting pieces of it that you've seen. There is a point where a human being rejects, there's an uncanny valley of artificial intelligence seeming reliance or artificial intelligence sounding statements. And if you get too far into that uncanny valley, people actually distrust things. What we found from studies at this point is that the mixture of a human being and artificial intelligence generally ends up being a little better than just artificial intelligence on its own. A human expert is still generally something that is preferred in the other contexts, like we usually like a person to be the one that we're interfacing with rather than a chatbot that pops up on every website. There are some industries where that's not the case. Medicine, for whatever reason, is a place where people do seem to prefer artificial intelligence much more than human input, most specifically in like reviewing x-rays and CT scans where the machine can find some like grain of rice sized tumor that a human eye might miss. That's where people say, I trust the artificial intelligence way more than my doctor. For most of the kind of human-facing industries, though, artificial intelligence does an okay job. Chatbots do an okay job, but there's a point beyond a substantial amount of usage where people start distrusting the outcomes. Outcome in the end is that trust is dynamic. Pure AI is not necessarily as good as a mixture. Just be aware that that's the case. Also, when I asked the prompt human mistake versus AI accuracy, it gave me this image, which is ironic because it spelled accuracy wrong. Dangers of AI, the overview. So despite its benefits, AI does pose several challenges that real estate firms must address. These range from data privacy issues to potential biases in decision-making algorithms. As AI expert Kathy O'Neill states, algorithms are opinions embedded in code, highlighting the importance of ethical AI use. And that's an actual, like, honest-to-God direct quote from a TED Talk in 2017, where a PhD mathematician data scientist essentially explained that. Her entire speech, if you want to listen to it, it's on YouTube. It's pretty good. She basically talks about the way that coding works and the way that you get to these large language model answers and the generative AI answers. And in the end, you still have to put some sort of evaluation structure on the answers that are received, which means at all times when you get a response from artificial intelligence sources, there has been a human that has been fiddling with the weighting system in that structure at some point. The best way to think about that is if you were to go onto, for example, ChatGPT and ask it to help you find it, like, how do I rob a bank and get away with it? It will generally respond with like, yeah, I can't do that. Sorry, man. Like, that's just not what I can help you with. That was a human decision to put a limiter on that, to say, okay, ChatGPT, if someone asks you to help them commit a crime, say no. That's a person's input onto the thing. Now, for things like don't commit a crime, makes sense. The social contract works. We all agree with that sort of outcome. But there are other places where it becomes problematic. If AI, for example, says, you know, like, how do you value an employee? If I'm comparing two employees, which one is more valuable? I've got one employee who is a young man and one employee who's a young woman. If I go straight to the AI and ask it the question, it is entirely possible that it has been coded to value things like amount of time on the job statistically or like over the course of a person's lifespan, and it'll find some document or source somewhere in the book somewhere that says it's possible that a young woman will have a child and it's less likely that women come back to work after having children. It'll go, there it is, that's the reason. Now that is a violation of the law to make a decision based on that. That's against the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, among other things. That's not allowed. But unless the machine has been coded to very intentionally think those things through, unless it's been given guardrails to specifically say, hey, don't say that response because that's super not allowed against the law, or in the law, you may get the response that sounds very unbiased, sounds very neutral, but in the end is an opinion coded deeply into the process itself. There is a fair amount of data privacy that is at risk in artificial intelligence uses as well. The integration of AI requires a vast amount of data, a huge amount of data collection, a huge amount of data analysis. It collects personal and financial data from clients. Protecting that information is incredibly important, and data breaches can often lead to reputational damages and legal consequences. A case study involving a major real estate or property firm showed a devastating impact of a 2023 cyber attack, stressing the need for robust security measures. Now, if you dig in on that one, there are some things that can be taken from this. First off, some countries have AI protection laws. The US really doesn't. We don't have comprehensive data security laws as a nation. Oregon adopted the Oregon Consumer Data Privacy Act in 2024. That's great, but it only applies to companies that control data of at least 100,000 Oregonians. Oregonian consumers rather, or derive 25% of their revenue from the sale of personal data and control 25,000 people's worth of data or more. That means there is a very, very small universe of businesses that this applies to. You can, if you are dealing with one of those companies like a Microsoft or Google that does have access to a huge amount of your data, you can request that the data controller confirm whether they are processing personal data, and you can revoke consent to sell your data or request deletion of that data. The controllers of that data are required to provide some limited amount of collection to merely what is necessary and adequate for their purposes. But there's really not very much that we can do beyond that. If I ask Google, please stop selling my data, and they say, yep, no problem, I can't really guarantee, unless I have some very affirmative proof that my data is still being sold, there's nothing I can really do from that point onwards. And so there's a law in place. The enforceability of that law becomes very difficult to assess because of the scale of what we're dealing with. So just be aware, while there are data protection laws in Oregon, they aren't in the United States writ large, and they're very, very difficult to utilize effectively or efficiently nationwide. Now, the other thing is that case study involving a major property firm. That was from a paper in January 2024 on the 23rd Annual Security Conference, where there was a white hat hacker. You can describe hackers based on their headwear. White hat hackers are ones that work with companies. They basically go up to them and say, I am going to break into your company's security systems, and if it's successful, I'll know where the breaches are and I can show them to you. You'll pay me for that job. That's going to be great. And it's a service that is rendered. White hat hacking is a process where they're like selling the service of hacking into a company to identify failures. That's great. Gray hat hackers break into a company and then let people know, hey, by the way, I broke into your company. You're going to want to get on that. And black hat hackers are people that just break into companies and make use of the data. The classic criminal is the black hat hacker, but a white hat hacker discovered, i.e. broke into, an unencrypted, no password database that was owned by the New York-based Real Estate Wealth Network. It's a real estate company that has over 1.5 billion records of various property transactions. It detailed things like addresses, purchase data, tax records of millions and millions of people. That included the hacker found his own information, as well as stuff like Britney Spears and Donald Trump. Their personal information was in that, like a lot of celebrities in the New York area. It wasn't distinctly about artificial intelligence itself, just a statement about kind of bad cybersecurity, but be aware, the more data you have and the more data you feed into your artificial intelligence devices, it is a data-hungry monster, the more you will generally have that you expose to the world, or the more possible exposure you have. Data itself is something that has an increasing amount of value. It didn't for the last 30 years. We just kind of knew it existed and nobody really cared. We're starting to get to a point as a citizenry, a populace, a nation, a world, that we understand that artificial intelligence is making a lot of money, or potentially making a lot of money off data, and therefore data is valuable. And as a result, if you have a company, for example, that has a lot of access to a lot of data, you are very valuable to a potential hack. AI systems can inadvertently perpetuate biases, leading to discriminatory practices. For instance, an AI tool might rank properties in a way that unfairly favors certain demographics. Real estate professionals must audit algorithms regularly to ensure fairness and inclusivity. Now, it's really easy to just say, why don't you just audit the AI? Actual auditing of an algorithm is incredibly difficult. That's because algorithms tend to be proprietary information, so you don't get to see the code itself, with that one exception of that Chinese company that produced DeepSeek. That was the only open source one that I know of that people have made. Per a Stanford human-centered artificial intelligence group, there are the process of auditing an algorithm is methods of repeatedly and systematically querying an algorithm with inputs and observing the corresponding outputs to draw inferences about its opaque inner workings. Basically, you just ask the robot questions and really think critically about what exactly would cause the answer to be what it was. This generally means that you have to ask a lot of questions and sometimes ask variations on the same question just to see what the output is. Ultimately, you are trying to figure out why the machine works the way it does. It is essentially like when you're a little kid and you have a magic 8-ball and you're like, it must be magic. Every time I ask it a question, a different thing pops up. That's essentially what you're doing with these machines. There is an answer. There is a logical chain that explains every answer you get, but you do need to start coming to an understanding of those systems themselves. One of the things they suggest is consider about when the algorithm is updated. So for example, when we did this training with Copilot, when we produced it the first time, it was April of 2025. By now, it has been updated several times, and it's very likely that Copilot has more accurate outcomes, and we could have a totally different presentation if we asked Copilot today. You need to consider personalization. Some artificial intelligence systems will follow and track your answers over time. If you use ChatGPT, it is known for tracking the answers you provide unless you have very specific settings. And so as a result, it may have imprinted on you individually, and it's giving you answers that are customized to just you. That's essentially what cookies help the websites do at certain, like advertising do on certain websites. The same is true of artificial intelligence. If you ask it a question, you might get one answer. If your friend asks it a question, they might get a different answer. And that's because you two are understood as different people by the machine. You also want to consider the legal and ethical concerns that are going to arise. Essentially, what happens if I'm wrong? If I ask it a question about demographic information and I'm wrong, and the machine is not providing me with neutral, unbiased information, and I'm instead getting something very, very biased, what is the potential risk? It could be a substantial lawsuit, and that's something you want to avoid. Dependence on AI. Over-reliance on AI can erode human expertise and intuition, which remains vital in complex decision-making scenarios. A balanced approach combining human judgment with AI insight is essential to avoid pitfalls. Now this, to a certain extent, comes from Aether, AI Ethics and Engineering in Engineering and Research. It's a group that publishes, it's like a journal, essentially. It's an academic journal. They published a literature review on over-reliance on AI, and this is what the Copilot led us directly to, and with full disclosure, we did directly rely on what Copilot gave us as their one source because it was pretty accurate, it seemed. The finding was that over-reliance on artificial intelligence, when a user is unable to determine how much or whether they should trust the machine, as a result of a lack of understanding of the structures of the program itself, it oftentimes results in someone over-relying on the machine itself because they don't understand what it can do, how well it can perform the tasks you've asked it to do, and how it works in general. It's something where we're just understanding. There's a classic psychological experiment called where Skinner, I think it was B.F. Skinner, he had pigeons in a box, and if they poked this little knob, food would come out, and the pigeons would go, oh, food. And then he slowly made it more complicated to a point where it was like once every random period of time, food would pop out. And the pigeon would notice it did something, and then food would pop out. And then later on, it would do the same thing again, and by random happenstance, food would pop out again. And eventually, the pigeons all started spinning in circles, because as far as they could tell, spinning in circles was what caused the food to pop out when it was instead on a random timer. The same is true of AI. Just because you got a right answer one time doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to be right, and you want to make sure you understand where it's coming from, because you might be a pigeon spinning in circles that just understands maybe this is how I get a right answer, where they're like, oh, every time I use AI, I always say please, because when I'm polite, the answers are better. Like, I have a friend that does that, and that's not necessarily reflective of an understanding of the machine. Oftentimes you will see people either agree with the outcome, the output that gets brought in from artificial intelligence sources. So for example, if I ask Google something, that little Google AI overview that pops in at the start, that is Gemini answering the question to a certain extent. You'll oftentimes see people that'll switch their answer to whatever Gemini recommends or whatever Google recommends immediately without questioning any further or going to other sources because it's the first thing that pops up and it's something that you're like, well, it's got to be right. And that over-reliance on the machine creates further reliances over-reliance, and it eventually kind of it's a perverse structure that eventually causes someone to just essentially only trust what the machine pops out. You will see someone switching their answers to reflect what an artificial intelligence says. That is oftentimes what's happening in the world of law. You'll have regular situations where a lawyer answers a question or is pretty sure they know the answer. They'll Google something and the machine will say something different. They go, well, that must be right. And the courts have found that many times it's not. There have been hallucinated cases, fake case law, all kinds of things. And so the attorneys that are relying on whatever pops up first on Google are not necessarily they're getting in trouble because essentially you shouldn't change your recommendation based off of just AI. You want to change it based off of accurate reasons to change your answer. Or people will otherwise put great weight on the artificial intelligence answer. Now, to some extent, people do tend to favor recommendations that come from an automated source because they believe it is more objective. When I Google something and the little Google like Gemini AI assisted overview pops up first, people generally are like, yeah, it's Google. Google's a very large company. They must be correct. We tend to succumb to the confirmation bias until it is wrong as well. It is worth noting the way you ask a question is critically important with all artificial intelligence devices. If I ask why Portland is amazing, I'll get one set of answers. If I ask why is Portland a dump, I'll get different answers. I am ultimately in both situations asking what's your opinion of Portland. I'm going to get a different answer in both directions. And that's pretty normal. The machine is not neutral. It is responding to your question. And if your question lacks neutrality, so too will the answer. When we do break the cognitive dissonance and there comes a moment where you go, oh, it was really wrong, or you see a critically wrong answer from an artificial intelligence source, oftentimes that's the moment where the person pops their head out of Plato's cave and goes, hey guys, I see the real world. This is not what it's supposed to be. We have the wrong answers coming from the machine, and they'll start critically analyzing things again. But again, people kind of trail off into over-reliance and complacency with the artificial intelligence answers very quickly. AI, when it does explain its reasoning, people tend to rely on it much more. It is worth noting that the explanation artificial intelligence provides is oftentimes no more accurate than the original answer. So ultimately, you still have to go back to the original source. Always go back to the first source that gives the answer. If you can, always find some professional, trusted individual that is providing the answer. Don't just rely on what Google tells you at the top of the list. Solutions to mitigate over-reliance as far as Aether is concerned are onboard users with how AI works. If you have AI in your office regularly, make sure everybody knows how it works and how it doesn't work. Employ cognitive forcing functions. You interrupt the routines periodically and stop and think, analyze what the answers are, what the questions were that led to where you are, kind of what we're doing in this scenario. Alter the speed of your interactions, pause periodically, think critically, stop, come back to it a couple days later, see how it does at that point. And if you are an AI creator, they were really making a beseech to people like OpenAI, be transparent and provide effective explanations of your processes. At present, we're trying to figure it out without any actual proof. And so a lot of this is just kind of people's best guesses at how to fix the problem or how to determine what's going on. Now, there is some degree of a cybersecurity problem that is also at play. AI systems are susceptible to hacking and other cyber risks, potentially from exposure to, potentially ones that will expose sensitive client information or business data. Cybersecurity protocols are really important. Multi-factor authentication, all those other things are important. Center for Security and Emerging Technology, it's out of Georgetown University. They used AI systems to basically, they tried to hack AI systems, and they found out it was pretty easy. You can poison an AI system very easily by integrating specific data sets that are very, very pointed in one direction or another. If I have access to the training data for an artificial intelligence, I can seed the response I want out of it. It essentially only becomes apparent once the machine would have to draw upon that data. But for example, if I was teaching an artificial intelligence device about Oregon forms, real estate forms in Oregon, and I only fed it with data from Oregon Realtor forms, and you ask it a question about how to fill out a contract, it will tell you, hey, this is how you do it, but it would draw that information from only Oregon Realtor forms, which means if you're using OREF forms, you might have a whole different answer that's at play. That's ultimately the risk that you run in these situations where you don't know what the machine has been trained on, you don't know what it is valuing and not valuing, and so you have to be very cautious when asking questions in this world of uncertainty. You also have the ability to introduce malicious code through certain open source projects. So DeepSeek, for example, is the one that is a Chinese AI system that they produced and put open source. If you don't know how to speak code very fluently, don't just copy and paste code from other places, because that's kind of how programs work too with GitHub, but it's something. You just want to make sure you understand where things come from, and generally use something that is trusted and vetted, because it is very easy to poison these projects or to produce like a backdoor or a malware within the actual code itself. There's also a way to reverse engineer AI if you're really clever and the machine hasn't, like the programmers of the AI system haven't caught it yet, where you essentially just backtrack an understanding of what it was trained upon. You say like, wow, where did you learn that? And it'll answer the question as best as possible. And you can find at times that the AI has been fed information it was maybe not supposed to, or it's telling you information it was not supposed to divulge. Even with the sophistication that comes with AI, it can make mistakes. Errors are a thing that happen. There are incomplete pieces of data that lead to flawed predictions and decisions. Real estate professionals need to critically analyze AI outputs to avoid costly mistakes. A great example of this sort of thing here is hallucinations research. So there was a study in 2020 where they asked for 3 different processes: ChatGPT, Bard, which now is Gemini, and an earlier version of ChatGPT, to provide a citation of specific PubMed articles on rotator cuff surgeries or pathologies from 2020. So a very small number of articles. They knew exactly what they were asking for, and they said, ChatGPT, tell me every article from 2020 on specifically shoulder rotator cuff problems. And what they found was if they made a mistake on the citation on 2 out of the 3, out of the titles, the authors, of the year that the article was published. So all the years should be 2020. They knew who all the authors were. They knew what all the titles were. If 2 of those 3 were wrong, they counted that as a hallucination. Basically, it just got it wrong. ChatGPT 3.5 was wrong 40% of the time. Gemini, Bard, which is now Gemini, was wrong 90% of the time. That is an enormous failure rate, an extraordinary failure rate. Now, nonetheless, they're getting better over time. Hallucination rates have gone down since 2020, since 2024. It's gotten better as time has gone on. And this isn't even really like a critique of hallucinations in general, because if you do this with human beings, you find failure rates very similar. 2005 study of newspapers, they found that when you look at a whole bunch of newspaper stories, about 60% of the articles had errors, mistakes, or assumptions or biases that were unsupportable. And as a result, that basically means a newspaper journalist who's stressed and working as hard as they can is about as accurate as ChatGPT 3.5. Is sort of maybe a little bit more accurate, maybe a little less. As time goes on, this will improve. There will be less flaw in the data itself, but just be aware there are mistakes. Mistakes happen, and they happen regularly in these systems right now. AI does offer significant advantages. Careful implementation and regular audits are crucial to minimize risks. Collaboration between tech experts and real estate professionals can ensure AI's ethical and effective use. Now, one thing that is worth noting, insurance providers are starting to look into AI liability as something that goes into your cybersecurity policies. AI insurance is going to probably become a more regular part of the insurance market as time goes on. At present, it's not necessarily a default. If you are planning to use artificial intelligence to speed any part of your business practice, talk to your insurance provider, make sure they cover it. If they don't cover it, balance that risk against the prospective benefit of using these structures, because ultimately it may be something that if there's a mistake, you're paying for it yourself because insurance won't cover it. They'll say that's outside our policy. We don't do that here. There are some case studies that Copilot wanted me to point out. One of them was a Compass real estate process. They launched Compass AI in 2023. It was designed to streamline daily operations of the real estate company. Well, the initial predictions were really rosy. They were like, man, there's going to be some great data. This is going to be awesome. The profitability picture was starkly different. This was not data that was given to me by Microsoft Copilot. In fact, this is something I had to do on my own separately, and so I deviate from the original source text on this a little bit. Copilot cited this as a great success story. They're like, Compass AI, big success, huge, great thing. Presumably they didn't update their data for 2025 because in 2025 they were doing a little bit less business than your average business, like non-artificial intelligence driven business. They were basically just a generic brokerage. They were not meeting these like, we're going to do so much more business than everyone else because everything's going to be AI streamlined. We'll be producing like 10 times as many sales as everyone else. That wasn't the case. Now, Copilot hadn't caught up with that yet. When I asked it in 2025 for that information, it did not know. So as a result, this was supposed to be the success story. On the other side, Zillow had a whole process for home buying. They had an algorithm that they would use, and they were trying to find overestimated or like underestimated houses. They were trying to find diamonds in the rough that Zillow home buying could purchase, fix up, and then sell for a huge profit. And they invested huge amounts of money into that, only to find out that their algorithm was not correct. Their AI system was overvaluing homes, and as a result, they bought the homes at inflated prices rather than deflated prices. And as a result, they found themselves suffering $540 million in losses, and they shut down the Zillow offers division and fired a quarter of their workforce. So like, it was a dramatic failure of artificial intelligence in Zillow's land. Copilot originally, when I asked for a failure of AI example, it was like Amazon hiring algorithms. There were some situations where Amazon was hiring men at much higher rates than women as a result of the way that their algorithm worked. The citation brought you to an ethics.harvard.edu article. If you go to that ethics article, what it would do is talk about Zillow or Amazon's hiring practices, and then literally a paragraph later, it says, also, here's this thing about Zillow making huge problems. That is kind of frustrating because I was asking Copilot in the context of real estate the whole way to give me an example of a case study of bad AI usage in real estate. And it said, well, I can't find that, but here's this Amazon thing. And literally a paragraph below the example it stated was literally a real estate example. So it wasn't as accurate as I wanted it to be, but you know, it is what it is. The article from the Harvard ethics division was talking about that Zillow thing being a dramatic failure of AI, though. It is a little worthwhile as a sidebar. The American Bar Association adopted Resolution 604 in 2023, establishing guidelines for the industry of law. Our stance was that individuals and organizations should be held accountable for consequences caused by the use of AI products, for consequences caused for their systems or their capabilities, including any legally cognizable injury or harm that is caused by the actions of the AI system, unless they have taken reasonable measures to mitigate against that harm or injury. Basically, law firms, if you screw up, it's on you. When you hear these stories about a lawyer putting in an appellate brief that has fake citations, that is entirely on the lawyer, and the Bar Association approves of that lawyer being disbarred for it. There was a Harvard Business Review process that laid out a possible way to mitigate risk of AI. It was in an article in AI and Machine Learning. They said, ensure alignment between your organizational values and AI principles. If you're like a get it done for cheap brokerage, AI can sometimes help. If it's a brokerage that's very proud of having like a velvet glove individualized practice, maybe don't use AI because it doesn't necessarily align with your values. Mandate all created AI content is watermarked as artificial intelligence. Create a controlled AI environment within the organization. Say what is allowed to use AI, what's not allowed to use AI. If you overuse AI, you might find yourself getting into problems that where you're out over your skis and you weren't thinking about it necessarily. Train your employees and make them aware of how AI works, what it does, what it can do, and what it can't do. And set up damage mitigation plans for uncontained situations. If you do have something that goes haywire and AI takes you the wrong direction, what you do want to do at that point is have a plan for what you do next. Usually that's going to be make sure your insurance policy covers AI mishaps. If that doesn't cover it, then have a plan for how you're going to deal with it. Maybe a slush fund where if somebody is injured from the usage of an artificial intelligence system and it's objective, then you can just pay that out. But be cautious in how you do this because you're in a world of potentially unlimited liability at this point because the case law just hasn't produced an answer for how expensive or how inexpensive a mistake is. So this is the conclusion slide. AI innovation like virtual reality tours and augmented property showcases and advanced analytics technology are reshaping real estate as AI continues to evolve. Its integration into real estate operations will become even more seamless. Now, that is kind of like, that's AI tofu language. It just is what it is. It's a generic statement that was produced by Copilot. The answer is essentially that AI is a tool. It is a calculator that has some fancy features that you don't necessarily know about yet. It will improve over time. That's the simple direction of technology. Eventually, it will likely become a core element of your industry in some way or another. It is imperfect at present. Be aware, you are on the cutting edge of this process. It is not something that has become integrated into the systems yet. It should be used. It should be experimented with. You should see how it works. Try it out. See if it helps you with things. If it helps, great. Put guardrails around it and make sure you understand what you're doing with it. But be very cautious about how you utilize this tool because at the end of the day, you are responsible for all of your own actions. If you haven't directly taught it something, it won't do that. You need to make sure that you understand how you are using the machine, and you want to make sure that you're using it properly. If there is something that I've learned from this presentation in the process of building it, it's that if you're using AI and then looking over it after the fact to review, it takes substantially longer than just doing it yourself. Creating this presentation took longer than most other presentations for a 1-hour presentation because we had to backtrack research into figuring out what the heck the black box told us for every single line that it gave. Now, that's not to say that AI isn't a cool tool that can speed things up and make very impressive outcomes. It's to say doing the job right is very difficult, and having a tool that's supposed to solve all these problems is helpful, but only if you know how the tool works. And at present, you're not allowed to know how the tool works because it's proprietary. In the future, maybe it'll be something that everyone understands and uses. At present, it's still very difficult to assess when you're getting the right answer or when you're getting a right-shaped answer. And that's what we've got for today. Let's see what we have in chat.
There was a question about RPR and AI output that might be great to address.
Where is that? Oh, there we go. Would you consider estimated price as a result of the input into RPR and AI output? To some extent, yes, but there's a range. In this context, I'm using AI broadly speaking, and there's a whole broad range of what that could mean. It's kind of like saying, a hammer. It could be a sledgehammer or one of the little tiny ones you use on a wall. It's the same word used for both. Same is true of AI. Something like estimated price tool is usually going to have very rudimental processes that it goes through. It's a rudimental algorithm to get the output. The more rudimental the algorithm, the more accurate the output is generally. So the more simplified tools that are used for a very, very distinct answer, they're going to be pretty effective. To some extent, I could even argue that the mortgage calculator, the mortgage interest calculators, many of them are artificial intelligence sort of things now because they're integrating in grabbing some source work data from other places because they're not updated every single day with the most recent applicable federal rate. But that's such it's such a specific and such a specialized tool that it's not like a huge concern risk AI. Where you're most concerned is the place where artificial intelligence says, I can do anything. You want to put a picture in this? I can take the person in the background out of the picture. You want to put a house in this? I can make it look like it's on Mars. You could sell a house on Mars today with listing photos that look accurate. I could do that with AI. And that's where you get yourself into the most concern, the most risk, is where the thing has unlimited usage. The more cabined in the usage, the less risky it is, but I would still encourage you to test it and audit it for accuracy to make sure you understand how and when it works. Stop a screen share. If people do have questions, I can stay on for a couple more minutes just to, is Grok good to use? So there's a broad question about which ones are the best or which ones are the worst to use, and there's not really a clean answer. Anything that involves Grok is going to be somewhat controversial just because of the connection that it has with Elon Musk at this stage. Grok is arguably the least guardrailed of the AI systems that exist. It is the one that is the most willing to do things that are potentially illegal. And that's not to say that that's a super good or a super bad thing. That's just a generic description of it. They're currently getting sued because Grok allowed you to edit pictures to have children in swimsuits or children in the nude. And it was that's illegal. That's super illegal. But because the central mission of Grok AI was essentially we want the AI to be able to do whatever we want it to do, it has many fewer guardrails. And there are some places where that is sometimes useful or helpful, where ChatGPT will give you these super cabined in, and Copilot, for example, is probably the most guardrailed in version. Copilot gives you very benign answers most of the time. And if I have a client that wants to do something is this illegal? Copilot will be well, there's many ways to think about it. And whereas Grok might be able to say, if I were to do the following things and I took one more step towards being illegal, then yes. And it may sound like it's suggesting to me how to do a crime, but I'm trying to prevent one. And so it depends on how the tool is used. I don't personally like Grok very much because I don't like the freewheeling usage of it. Out of the set, I've been most impressed with ChatGPT out of the collective, but that isn't necessarily saying it's great. it just seems like the most tooled to a user out of the set. Gemini is probably the worst of the collective, but it's also probably the easiest to use, and it's the one that you accidentally interface with the most often. Claude is expensive, and I just haven't gotten too used to anything from Anthropic, so I can't give you a great answer on that. Let's see. Warren was saying, it's great information. I've never liked AI, but I do see where it could help at times. I appreciate showing its weaknesses. As everything in AI, real estate AI is important to review before publishing. Make sure everything is legal. Yes, review everything before you do anything with artificial. Like don't just let the machine make the answer and then just say, send it, print it, it's good to go. Always look over the outcomes because you don't always know when it's right. With that, that's our whole hour. If folks are ready to go, have a good day. Enjoy the sunlight.